Okay, good evening, everybody. This is a little, new and different, so we'll practice and get better at it, I'm sure, as we go along. I know probably most of us have been doing Zoom calls, but this is the first one with a public forum, and so we'll experiment and see how this goes. So we have a short agenda tonight. And the purpose of the meeting, we'll call this a special meeting, given that we have not been able to meet due to the COVID-19 situation. This is an opportunity for us to hear from the chiefs about what's been going on operationally, how's the department handling this emergency and crisis situation that we've been in over the past several weeks, and updating us on anything that we would need to know about that. So the first item on the agenda is really any amendments to the agenda. Does anybody have anything COVID related specifically that they would like to add to the agenda?
No changes.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Hughes, so what are we calling COVID related if we define that?
Well, we've defined it in the agenda as the status and what the new operational, how the department shifted, what the new operational plans and protocols are, and what those are and how those are going.
So clearly we wouldn't know that, so we wouldn't have any ability to make any changes to the agenda.
That's true. So just in case there was anything specific that you wanted to know that doesn't fall under that. I mean, we certainly will have, I see this more as a discussion. So we'll be able to ask questions of the chiefs around this. So this is going to be really a discussion. But before we get started, I know we have some people from the public that are on the Zoom call, and I want to open it up to see if anybody has anything that they would like to address the commission on during the public forum time.
Chair, if I may, Roy had wrote in, and so Roy, I'm going to unmute you and allow you to speak.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Roy. He still looks muted, Shannon.
Yeah, sorry, Roy. I've unmuted you on this end. If you have mute selected on your end, you may have to there you go. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, testing.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Excellent. To respond to your question, I'm new. That newness makes my remarks very brief. So this is a learning process. However, in general, I'll drink in what happens here and be more fortified to make a contribution next time. But I'm pleased that there's momentum.
Great. So, did you have anything else? Did you have something else that you'd like to say, or are you going to wait until the next meeting? Or I'm sorry, I'm not quite understanding.
More informed remarks that I would make would come from the work that you're doing and how the agenda today will be addressed. I'm more in a learning mode in terms of the necessities and the emergencies which are facing us and how we're going to systematically address those. The commission, as I understand it, has been at rest for a period now, and you're starting again. So let's look at those priorities relative to the challenges that are facing all of us in general, and of course, the people of color community in particular.
Yep, exactly. Well, thank you. And thank you for joining on, and we'll be getting into the content, soon.
Excellent.
Thanks. Shannon, is there anybody else that would like to?
Yes, ma'am. Give me just one moment here. Let's see. Mayumi? Did I get that right?
Welcome, Mayumi. If that's
It's Mayumi.
Mayumi. Okay, great.
My question is, why is the tent encampment, I think it's in the Lakewood Terrace, why is that being demolished now? Why not wait till after we have a plan about where these people are going to be? I mean, that just doesn't make sense to me right now. I mean, because all these people are homeless. And one thing that, you know, that doesn't get talked about often enough is that homeless people are dependent on each other. Like, they help each other out. And by taking that campsite down, you're taking down a support system that they have. And so that doesn't make sense to me. And I want to understand why you're harassing homeless people when they don't have homes. They can't shelter like us in place. So why are the police bothering them at this particular time? I'm sorry, but those two they don't make sense to me. They really don't.
Okay. Thank you. Do any of the chiefs want to answer that question?
So I don't know if there's a tent community on Lake, which one? Did you say Lakeview Terrace or Lakewood Terrace?
Lakewood. It's somewhere behind in the woods, I think. Like back towards the bike path is where I'm guessing, because I grew up in that area.
Are you talking about Lakewood in the vicinity of Letty Park?
Probably is. If what I'm thinking is correct, then yes, I would guess that's probably the case.
I don't know that there is a tent encampment there, and we're not in the process of taking down any tent encampments.
Well, I mean, that's what I had heard, so that's why I was curious. I mean, I could understand perhaps after, but not now.
We have,
as we would agree. What we have done on the only encampment that we're currently addressing is one in what's called the Urban Reserve on the waterfront area. There are 2 or more tents in a wooded area just north of the sailing center. And those have been noticed that that is a restricted area. They're not allowed to camp there, but there is no effort underway to actually undertake a removal or a cleaning of the area for the very reasons that you cite. But once the situation stabilizes, we will be moving those tents. They cannot be in that area, nor could tents be in Letty Park if there are any. I believe there's one currently in the vicinity of the Hannaford next to Letty Park. And similarly, there's a large encampment in Spears Lane in the south end of town that will be removed legally, lawfully, with proper notice. But it will be removed. We've forestalled most of these efforts owing to COVID-19 and the reasons you cite. If we're going to issue stay home, stay safe orders, it makes no sense to de-home people. But at the same time, people can't just stay wherever they want on city property. And there are places where it is not permitted, it is prohibited to camp.
I guess I would add to Chief Murad's remarks to say that the amount of support the city has provided to home people in this crisis is unprecedented. And if you have a concern, you used the word that the police were harassing people. If you have a complaint, we would love to know more about it and investigate it. But I
can get back to the people. I mean, it's up to them whether they want to or not. I mean, I don't know. I mean, most people don't want to because they prefer not to deal with the police at all, you know?
Okay, we have a pretty robust outreach to partner agencies that serve homeless people. We have a community affairs unit that is pretty well knowledgeable and in touch with that segment. And they have had very good success with having dialogue with folks who are without homes or between homes. And so I would encourage you to spread the word to whoever it is you're hearing this from, that our community affairs team is absolutely, one is a civilian, one's a police officer. They are absolutely available as a resource, but more importantly, they can connect them to other resources if they're uncomfortable talking to a representative from the police department.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is that okay? Thank you very much for coming and asking the question so we could all hear and all learn from that. Anybody else, Shannon?
I do not see any other hands raised. Let me just do one quick check of my email here to see if there is anybody else. I do not see anybody else that has expressed interest.
Okay. Okay. So let's get to the meat of the agenda. And I think Chief Morrison will probably start with you to give us, an overview of what's been happening at the police department and the changes you've made and how things are going.
Sure. I emailed members of the commission on the 20th of April with a pretty extensive update relative to how we arrived at and the iterative process of updating our operational plan. And then I spoke a little bit about the Emergency Operations Center, talked about other things happening in the department outside the scope of COVID-19, which obviously for this meeting, I'm keeping it to the COVID-19 response. Our operational plan is 12 pages long, the current version, which condensed and updated pretty much every time that the governor has added more or less to it. It is a document that we would happily share with the police commissioners individually, but it is not a public-facing document and is not available for secondary dissemination, as it has information in it that's relative to certain strategies and to staffing levels that we think is not that would negatively impact public safety if it was a publicly shared document. So if it is the desire of commissioners, I could have this scanned and emailed to you individually to take a look at if you have questions about it. But I don't think there's going to be anything very different from what you expect to have seen at companies all around the world, which is that we very early on locked down our facility, recognizing that we don't have a redundant headquarters. We don't have a substation that we could work out of. We don't have a secondary dispatch center. We took aggressive action early to make sure that non-employees and even employees who weren't required to be on site were no longer on site. And everybody who comes in is subject to a screening process involving the questions recommended by the CDC and 3 temperature checks with a touchless device. We drastically reduced the number of people in-house at any one time by taking various steps to move people to a work from home capability. Most of our workforce that is not required to be on site is able to do all or some of its work from home, with the exception of parking enforcement, which had been sent home relatively idle, but for some administrative work and putting money, making sure that accounts are reconciled, et cetera, a few hours a week. And in the past week, one of the field workers, the meter checkers, has asked to be put to work. So she has been coming into the office on limited hours to assist with mask distribution, the cloth mask distribution, et cetera. The police department has been very flexible in that. We've been using since our folks are out on the road anyway, we've been doing a lot of the deliveries to mask drop-offs, and we've been staffing the masks events at the grocery stores that have been happening this week and last week. We have issued more personal protective equipment, as you can imagine, to our personnel and established guidelines for what type of gear needs to be worn in what types of situations. For instance, when folks are out of their cruiser or out of the building, they're expected to wear either a cloth mask or more likely a surgical mask. The cloth masks are harder to be heard clearly through. And in the event that you had to take off running after anyone, they're a lot harder to breathe through than a surgical mask. They're also issued N95 masks for which everyone's been fit tested in the event that they anticipate having to go hands-on or be around people for an extended period of time. And we have various other PPE ranging from eye protection, face shields, disposable gowns, and booties as the circumstances are necessary, which are few and far between for that level of PPE. But we've come a long, long way from week 1 and 2 of this, where PPE was very hard to get. And the state has been a terrific partner in that. And we've also had numerous donations from private companies, actually, that have really allowed us to have a very good inventory of PPE. So we have no concern in that regard. We worked with the legal department of the city to create a local ordinance as a interim means of being able to take enforcement action for willful violators of the governor's stay home, stay safe order. And we did have in the early weeks problems with a certain couple groups around town that just had no intention of abiding and told us so. And so that tool was created in order to have something between going back and educating and saying the same thing every few hours and using the system that the state set up, where if you want to take criminal action against someone, you have to route it through a portal and then they assign it back to the local agency. So we got this ability to write Vermont municipal ordinance tickets, and we have not had to, which has been a really pleasant, a very pleasant turn of events. That we also did some target hardening at some places where people were congregating and willfully congregating, and they felt it was their turf. And so we had some local property owners put up fencing and do other things to help us keep those areas safer. Let's see. We've obviously had a lot of changes to how we operate, given to the fact that the court system is at a virtual standstill. There's some stuff happening. We've been asked to issue citations weeks and weeks out after an offense for things that aren't a custodial arrest. So we're issuing citations weeks down the road rather than just a couple weeks. We're talking 6, 8, 12 weeks down the road. There are many minor offenses that are either not being pursued so as to avoid a huge glut when the courts open back up. And also there's low-level offenses that more than in the past, that we would channel through to alternative processes at the Community Justice Center. So there's definitely been a bit of a change in how that process works, but our call volume has dipped quite a bit, as you can imagine. I mean, there just aren't that many people out. So our call volume's down. Chief Murad would have better numbers on that, because I was just looking at a pretty graph on his computer.
I do have that information. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
just one moment.
John, while you're looking at that, can I
Sure.
get commissioners to raise hands if they want us to individually email them the ops plan? Okay. Shannon, can I hand you this and have you scan it, but don't send it as a group email, send it to them individually? And maybe, all right, that would be great, thanks.
So overall, from March 15th through May 1st, the period most affected, obviously, by the various aspects of the governor's executive order, our overall incidents have fallen quite a bit. Last year, during that same period, there were 3,432. This year, there have been 2,607. So a significant drop off. Arrests also significantly down. Arrests during that period last year were 238. There have been 119 this year. So really drastic drops in calls for service, drastic reduction in arrests. There have been a handful of categories that have either seen increases or have remained level, which, given the relative reduction in calls for service, is also something that is worth noting. But rises in domestic disturbance. Domestic disturbance is sort of a catch-all. It has been used for a number of things that probably wouldn't have been domestic disturbance previously. But if you hear a ruckus from your neighbor or down the street, it might be termed as a domestic disturbance now, rather than having a more specific call designation. And so domestic disturbance has skyrocketed. I don't have the actual figure for that. Burglaries
A lot of the domestic disturbance, and it's important to distinguish, is because
not domestic violence.
Right. We have 3 categories: domestic violence felony, domestic violence misdemeanor,
And domestic
disturbance. And from some of the reports that I've been perusing, there's more complaints of parent-child disturbance where they're getting hot with each other, and probably because they're home all the time with each other. There's some more roommate disturbance. So they qualify as domestic because they're in the same household, but it's not, doesn't rise to the level of criminal behavior. So I just want to make sure that we're clear that it's not that there's more crime related to domestic violence, it's that we're receiving more calls of, as John put it, a ruckus inside residences.
But we have seen increases in domestic violence as well, in the actual misdemeanor felony category, from 4 during the same time period last year to 9 this year. Burglaries are up from 8 during the period last year to 17 this year. Last year was an anomalously low, in a good way, year. So 17 is not actually all that out of proportion to previous years, but it was much more than last year. There's also, 17 is a relatively small number, but more of them were commercial burglaries than we have seen in the past. And these are functions of businesses being, untended, and of people being able to move more freely. That's also probably the cause of the anecdotal increases that we've heard about graffiti, is that both the people that would commit graffiti crime have more leeway to do so on empty streets, and the opportunities that we have to mitigate graffiti crime through painting and covering was minimized for a long time, owing to the fact that we were just as obligated to obey the governor's stay home, stay safe order as anyone, and we could not send crews out to repair. So that has caused an increase. And frankly, I've had more citizens come to me with concerns about graffiti than I have with concerns about the fact that we had 4 shooting incidents in a 2-week period, including a homicide and a double attempted murder. That is not what drives our community to be concerned. It is issues with graffiti. It is issues with whether or not there are more or fewer, examples of homelessness or encampments, or why are there homeless people still on Bank Street, even though the governor's told everybody to stay home. Those are the things that generally drive community members to seek answers.
Can I just ask a quick clarifying question? You were talking about the number of incidents between March 15th and May 1st. What's in the category of incident?
That's the entirety of our quote unquote calls in Valcour. So a portion of that decrease is that we're not doing service here at the station anymore. For example, for VIN checks, if somebody comes in seeking a confirmation of a vehicle identification number, we're not doing that. And that would have been a Valcour entry. But the majority is not. The majority is not small stuff like that. It's calls for service. It's people calling and saying, I observed somebody who seemed to be looking at cars or breaking into cars down the road. I've heard a fight in my neighbor's house. I woke up this morning and found that our garage had been burglarized. Those are the calls, and the call volume is significantly down.
Do you have a easily handy?
Are you asking for a percentage? I'm about to get one for you.
No. I was actually just wondering about civil violations, ticketing, things like that. I was wondering whether that was...
The tickets and the arrests are the same. So the cites, the arrest figure is cites and tickets.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, but Randall, I want to make sure that we're being clear. So citations are for criminal offenses, but if you're asking us about issuance of Vermont municipal ordinance or traffic tickets, our traffic stops have plummeted. In the early days, we were only pulling over the most egregious violators, but there's just so few cars on the road anyway. So we had that. We had the data the other day. I don't have it at my fingertips, but our car stops, and you got to remember that historically, 80% of people leave a car stop with a warning. So traffic ticket issuance and city ordinance ticket issuance is way down. So the only other updates specifically related to COVID-19 would be We did take on an initiative called BPD Reads. If you want to watch it on our Facebook page, it's been pretty cute. And coming this week, we have a bit of a competition between some of the teams where we've set up a competition that each of the patrol teams and the different units would compete for the most creative submission to the BPD Reads program. And it's designed to reach out to families that are having to stay home all the time and perhaps are running out of options for their kids' entertainment. And it's also meant to make the police officers relatable and read stories that kids and candidly adults also might enjoy. So that's been something that we've been doing with some of our downtime. And then we also volunteered seven police officers to be part of the statewide contact tracing team. They ultimately were never needed. They were never fully trained or pressed into service. And we are in the process, I am with other department heads, of contemplating the idea of repurposing some of those as a citywide contact tracing team. As it's something where it's a work in progress. But so we are definitely trying to think about how, not only as an agency, but as a city, we can fiercely protect our physical and human resources if we know that we have somebody who's had a definite exposure or who has indeed turned positive, that we would be able to very quickly contact people around them and know exactly which areas and equipment need to be disinfected. Not like everything's being disinfected anyway, but so contact tracing has become something that we're beginning to think of taking on in the future, because this is going to be with us a while.
So, go ahead, Randall.
No, I was just wondering, are those resources which are being tasked potentially for contact tracing, have they been trained already, or are they getting guidance from the state? Okay.
So we offered 7 to the team, the statewide team. They went and got issued equipment and given passwords for certain systems, but then they never got trained. And so they have not been pressed into service yet at the state level. So we've sort of started to rethink the conversation of how could we use them not only just for the PD to keep our people in our building safe, but for the whole city. If there's a situation where there's an outbreak in the city, could we be useful? So, I guess another outcome would be, what if we have a second wave of this and the state's team gets overwhelmed? These are ideas of things that we're trying to add value and be ready to be prepared for whatever's next.
Who are the citywide public health officials that we're partnering with?
Right now, it's pretty much all departments. We're looking for people. We're using the city analytic team to do the research on contact tracing and to get us some information. So the analytic team that got stood up for this emergency, but we're partnering with the library and Parks and Rec and BFD as potential team members of the contact tracing team. It's all hypothetical at this point.
Yep.
Chief Morrison, I know we've had one officer who has tested COVID positive. Has there been any other
no.
folks that have tested? Okay.
No, in fact, what day is today? Thursday. Saturday, numerous department members are being tested. The Vermont Department of Health has offered first responder testing, and a goodly number of our people will be tested on Saturday.
Does anybody? I have more questions, but I want to make sure. Do any other commissioners have questions for any of the chiefs?
Yeah. So, I mean, I do have a question. Thanks, Chair. So again, this is mainly anecdotally right now, but I'm hearing concerns from 2 different directions with respect to how BPD is implementing the, stay home, stay safe order, right? One is, of course, people who would like there to be greater enforcement, right? Saying, oh, I see people walking around, they're not doing what they should be. Why aren't the police doing something like this? And I hear, from the other direction, I hear people saying, I'm concerned that the police might be overzealously interpreting this order so as to, prevent people from going about their daily lives in ways which don't seem to be posing immediate threats to other people. So I guess part of my question is, what sort of instruction have officers been given about how to interpret and support that particular order, and what sort of discretion do individual officers have?
Sure. So they've been given real-time updates as the executive order and the addenda have changed. in terms of what is and isn't allowed. But the global direction that they've been given since day one has not changed, which is we will come at this from an informational and educational approach, and that is where we start with every encounter. We seek voluntary compliance. In the event that you do not get voluntary compliance, there's certainly the discretion to issue a city ordinance ticket because we have the tool that we developed. Or for other situations that perhaps you think need greater enforcement, you can put the referral in through the Department of Public Safety portal. They vet it. The Attorney General's office is the only one who decides about whether or not anyone will be charged criminally for COVID-19 related offenses. But we have not had to avail ourselves of either of those last two options. And to your point, Commissioner, you are spot on, and it is being written about in many of our professional publications that the police are being put squarely in the middle, pretty much in an unwinnable position between folks who believe that we are not doing enough to keep people safe from themselves and from others, and others who believe that the restrictions are unjust and they should be able to do what they want. So we've only received one citizen's complaint about that would, I would say, even has anything to do with the COVID-19 response. And we can talk about that in executive session if that provides any, enlightenment. But I think we're in a difficult spot, but I really feel very strongly that our men and women have walked that line very well. We've had remarkable voluntary compliance from people, except for a handful of difficult characters who, candidly, we are dealing with them and struggling for answers about their situations without COVID-19. I think our men and women have done a really, really solid job. And if somebody has an opinion to the contrary, I invite them to share that with me or one of the other chiefs.
If I may, the other thing that we have that is fortunate is that the state and the city are on the same page. I think in many ways, the city has been leading an effort and wanting sometimes to move a little bit more quickly than the state. Obviously, we have different concerns being that we are the densest part of the state, but they're on the same page. And the governor has been very clear. The Attorney General and the Commissioner of Public Safety have been very clear in issuing guidance on all these fronts and providing a lot of structure for what our powers are or are not. California, for example, in Republican counties of California, there is a full-on combat between the governments of those counties versus the state's posture, and the police are thrown in the middle. They are thrown in the middle with regard to being asked by the state to do one level of enforcement, by the city or counties to do another. We are not in that position. We have very clear parameters for what we are or are not going to do. And as the chief said, we've been incredibly fortunate not to have to do any of it insofar as enforcement goes, because our neighbors are part of this. They really understand. I mean, we've constantly had a concern each weekend when there's going to be nicer weather. We've said, oh, this might be the one, this might be the moment. And I'm knocking on wood now, but we have not come to that moment. And it is really a testament to our neighbors' willingness to continue to work on this for the sake of their most vulnerable fellows.
Thank you. Quick follow-up to that. So is the city receiving information from the governor's hotline, the state hotline that was set up for people to report concerned, violations of the safe order they're concerned about? Are we receiving information from that BPD? And if so, how is that information being handled?
Yes, but only I think there have only been 2 or 3 instances. There have been a couple of business checks that we've been requested to do and have dispatched detectives to do legwork on running down allegations that were passed through that portal about whether or not, for example, U-Haul was renting in contravention of the governor's order, whether there've been a couple construction sites. We really haven't gotten a lot, and what there has been generally proactively collaborative, where we've been working with the Department of Public Safety rather than waiting for things from the portal, going ahead and actually doing initially preemptive checks at all the lodging facilities in town, the hotels, the inns, to make certain that they were in compliance. The other thing is that the notion, there have been more than 13 addenda to the governor's executive order. EO 01 of 20 has had 13 addenda. It is almost impossible to figure out what the current rules are insofar as a person out in public and what that person can or can't do based on all those addenda. Businesses are much clearer. And the fact is that the government is far more willing to use enforcement if necessary to get businesses to comply with what is required to keep everybody safe. A certain number of employees, and that number changes, but the businesses are expected to keep up with those changes and adhere to them. The number of employees, the number of space each is allotted, whether or not they're wearing masks. Public conduct by private citizens is a lot less specifically outlined. And it has been clear from the get-go that our objective is to get people to voluntarily comply, in part because the actual legal ramifications are more complicated.
Commissioner, I just want to let you know that we created a new call type at the beginning of this, and it's called a COVID-19 compliance check. And officers on patrol are actively doing, checking different parks or areas that are supposed to be not in use. Physically going into grocery stores to see if people are maintaining social distancing, if, things like that, like just going in and being visible and reminding people of what's supposed to be happening. So we have been proactively getting out and seeing that where compliance is greatest and where it's not. So.
Thank you. Again, and this would be anecdotal right now, but have people reported concerns about that kind of increased visibility in doing those COVID-19 checks?
No, not in fact, everywhere I've been, it's been tremendous appreciation that we're out and interacting with folks.
Since the 15th through May 1st, there have been 214 COVID compliance checks. So of those, of the overall incidents that we talked about, the 2,600, a good number of those have been COVID compliance checks, and we really are. We're while I say that the governments are both on the same page, that being the city and the state, our neighbors aren't. Some of our neighbors want us to go out and really be forceful and enforce, and others are saying that we need to be hands off. And you'll see that played out across the country. Last weekend, when there were a lot of people out and about in parks in New York City, there were calls for fire hoses against people in parks to get them out from being on the grass on a sunny day. And then, at the same time, there are people saying no, and we've seen what we've seen at state houses around the country with regard to protests about demands to open it up. We're so fortunate not to have had that, and that's a testament to the people here.
Great. Anybody else? Any questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Mark.
Thank you. I do have a few questions. I was wondering if we could go back, and there's quite a bit of ground that's already been covered. I was just yielding to my colleague there, but we'll be revisiting some of those. I want to just start with the strength and status. I think, Jen, you had mentioned that there was one person that was sick and got well, and I think I just heard somebody mention that. So is it safe to say that we've only had one person sick and they're okay, and that's the end of that, and we're going to be doing some more testing?
Yeah, that is the only employee that has been positive for COVID-19. We've had others there have been others that have been, ill, like normally people get ill in the winter, but we've only had one who's tested positive. The employee is fully recovered and back to work. And I think, Commissioner, that we consider ourselves very fortunate that we took aggressive action early, but we are not naive to think that there might not be more positives or situations in the future.
No, I wasn't suggesting that. And I was focusing on COVID-19 because the scope was pretty well defined at the top of the meeting. So what I was really getting at was just I just wanted to just emphasize just how fortunate we are. And the other follow-up piece of that is Can you share with us the current strength of the force? Head count.
Okay. We are currently at 93 sworn, and I don't know the exact number of civilian, but it's usually about 40.
Is 90? You're filling 93? Is that at a? I know we're staffed out at I believe it's 105 or something like that.
105, correct?
Is 93? Is that operational? Is that good?
It's operational. It's there's no meat on the bones. There's no room for contraction without reconsidering certain special assignments. And at the end of the day, the most important thing for any police agency is staffing the patrol division. So there's no meat on the bones at 93.
Got it. I don't ever recall it being as low as 93. That's the reason why I asked that question. And also, can you just take a few minutes, Chief, and just tell us so we can celebrate with you about the recent promotions?
Madam Chair, you feel free to cut me off if I'm going outside the scope of COVID-19, but these things have happened since COVID-19 and we haven't been able to properly have a promotion ceremony. So I think it's
a great question. It's a great question, Mark. Thank you. And I'm fine just talking about that now.
So as you know, Commissioners, Matt Sullivan was promoted to Deputy Chief. And he has been an amazing addition to the leadership team. He had been working on the Emergency Operations Center team prior to his promotion, and it has been a completely smooth transition. He is over the support services, the administrative side of the house, filling Jan Wright's previous position. So Matt was the promotion that came first, which created a vacancy at the rank of lieutenant. That process ran over 4 days. It was a lengthy, I would even say exhaustive process that we put some of the candidates through, and we selected Sergeant Brian Labarge to be the next lieutenant, he is currently the director of the Chittenden Unit for Special Investigations. He has slightly more than 15 years on the job, has served in a variety of roles, and his promotion to lieutenant will be effective on Monday, but he will remain at Cousy until July so that there's an orderly transition. So we'll have to reassign a current sergeant to be the next director at Cousy. So that transfer process will be coming up in the next few weeks. And by virtue of making a sergeant a lieutenant, we have a vacancy at the rank of sergeant, and that person will be promoted in July from a process that was run prior to me coming. So there was already a pool of eligible candidates, and that pool is viable for a year, and that process ran late last fall. So Jake Seller will be, Corporal Jake Seller will be promoted in July to sergeant.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I just want to personally congratulate Brian Labarge on his promotion to lieutenant, and Matt Sullivan on his promotion to deputy chief, and aspirationally Jake Seller as well. And I look forward to being involved in that process to the extent that we are able as the commission. Could you please kind of expand upon a little bit about a local ordinance? It sounds as though there's an ordinance that was passed that used as a tool. I understand that you haven't used it, but it was created for a specific purpose. I wasn't aware of it, and I was wondering if you can expand upon what that was all about, and also if you could focus upon the process.
In its nutshell form, Commissioner, it's a city ordinance that says you can't violate the governor's executive order. It doesn't specify what you can't do. It says you can't violate an executive order of the governor. Because as Deputy Chief Murad was just saying, the executive order has morphed many times through the different addenda that have been offered to it. So in a nutshell, it gives us the ability to write a ticket similar to our municipal ordinances for, say, excessive noise or public urination. It is similar in nature to a traffic ticket. They are all adjudicated by the Vermont Municipal Traffic Bureau and Municipal Ordinance Bureau. And that's the process basically was working with the legal department to say we would like an interim tool between having to give someone a criminal citation to go to court, which the courts didn't want any court cases, right? The whole point was of what their action was to keep cases out of court. So we wanted an interim tool. So we worked with city legal to create this ordinance. And as I said, we haven't had to use it.
Can I just follow up really quick? So what is the criminal citation that would be used?
Well, you would probably end up with some sort of seeking injunctive relief against the behavior that the people are doing, whether it's a business or a individual, and then you just cite them for contempt, basically. Okay. But that's the process that was laid out for us to use the portal that I talked about. And then the AG's office would make decisions about any criminal charges coming out of that. So we were happy to have an interim option that was locally available.
Frankly, both the state's attorney and the attorney general have been leery of criminal charges with regard to these issues. And I can't speak for the rest of the state, so I don't know whether any have been done, but they certainly have not been used. The criminal aspect has not been used in Burlington. Now, let me be clear, however, that other things that were crimes before remain crimes. And if you are out in a park last week, it's more confusing now, but let's say last week you were sitting on a park bench for an undue amount of time, or even as you and I did, Commissioner Harp, if we were standing for a little too long without actually exercising or moving around, if that was technically in defiance of the order, although we were social distancing and wearing masks, but we weren't moving and we weren't exercising, and we weren't going to a grocery store, that would have been a very tenuous use of any kind of enforcement power, civil or criminal. But if we had then cracked open beers and been enjoying them in the park, that would have been as liable as any day for a ticket about public alcohol consumption. And if we had been disorderly or caused a fight, then that too would have been worth a cite for disorderly conduct.
A further question about the citations. Am I correct to say that the Attorney General would need to vet any criminal charge, but civil that would not go to the Attorney General's office?
So a civil charge, as in a Vermont municipal ordinance ticket, would be handled the way a traffic ticket is handled, and it would be basically prosecuted by the officer as the de facto attorney, or the city attorney themselves. Our city attorney's office would handle it. But a criminal case related directly to COVID-19 would have to be handled by the Attorney General's office for everything in the state.
In developing our CER1 civil ticket, we worked with the Department of Public Safety and with the Attorney General's office to make certain that what was ultimately written by the city attorney was in keeping with the law and with working with them.
So the answer to that question is that the civil citations do not have to go through the Attorney General's office, correct?
Correct.
Correct. John, can you tell me a little bit more about targeted hardening, please?
No, I was talking about putting up fences to keep people off of properties where they like to congregate. So if you think about the abandoned Catholic church on Cherry Street, between Cherry and Pearl, the property owners came and put up a fence, and that dramatically reduced the number of problems we had there.
Got it. So just a couple more questions and I'll be done. I thank you for your patience. So with the orders of business closures, because I see that there's a lot of potential opportunity for increased contact just as a result of the traffic enforcement, business, personnel. There's the hotline. You got there's compliance checks. I'm looking also at business closures. I was wondering how that's enforced. And let me just tell you, just transparently, that I live across the street from a car wash on Riverside, and I don't know that car wash. I know that car wash hasn't closed the entire time of this particular crisis. So I was just wondering, what was what were the criteria? I was under the impression that they were all closed. It's personal, it's kind of selfish, but I just want to understand why that happened.
The question is, why was the car wash not closed?
Yeah, I guess a better question is was there an order that made it necessary for that car wash to be closed in the first place?
I think that would have to be a determination of whether or not it fell within the scope of the executive order, as in being part of an essential service. I would imagine.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm asking.
Right. Part of the calculus on that, I would imagine, would be that there's no physical employees there. It's a self-service thing where the human being driving the car is the only one washing the car or sitting inside an automated car wash. There's no employees on site.
He gets out of his car and touches all of the buttons on the dryer, as well as on the service apparatus as well. We can come back to that. I really don't want to belabor that.
Okay.
I really don't want to belabor that. I mean, I just brought the point up because it's directly across the street from my house, and it occurred to me that I think it's kind of in our rearview mirror right now. Anyway, contact tracing. I'm trying to understand from a civil liberties perspective how that sounds like a good idea for police to be conducting contact tracing. I heard instance of elsewhere where folks were doing actually health and welfare checks, and they invited plainclothes police along in that exercise, and I thought that was a bad idea too. So I'm trying to figure out, and I understand you haven't pulled a trigger. I guess that's a bad term, but you haven't executed on this. But don't you see some potential concern there of residents with civil liberties concerns surrounding contact tracing?
100%. And in fact, we didn't make any mention of doing it for the public. I said that we were preparing to work up a team in the city that would try to keep city infrastructure, equipment, and city resources safe. So
okay, I must have missed that. Sorry.
Yeah, we don't have any intention of doing this in lieu of the Department of Health, but if they became overwhelmed and needed more help, and we already had our own internal team staffed up, then we would certainly share resources as everybody in the state has done. And that's the only way a small state like Vermont can get through any major event. So no, okay, I would certainly share your concerns on that, Commissioner Hughes. We would have no intention of mandating anything for people who didn't want to talk to us about their healthcare status. That would be a non-starter.
Or perhaps they just didn't want to have police contact just because it's just simply as a result of them having a health crisis that sure, they would need to have police contact.
Right.
And I think the final question is there any conversation surrounding the potential of expanding the cruisy in light of the current situation with the intensity of the stay-at-home order and the rise in domestics and just all of this bad stuff that comes out of that?
There is no current plan to do that, and we have not received any information from the director that they are overwhelmed in any way. There are normal courses that if they do reach a peak of cases and need help, that we historically have pulled investigators who had previously served in the unit and have them do temporary stints back at Cousy. But there is no plan to expand the unit size at this time.
Much appreciated. I think the most important part of this interaction is just to express my appreciation for your service, for all of you, the hard work that you've done throughout the duration of this very difficult and unprecedented time that we're experiencing here as a city. I want to just take my hats off to the men and women who serve us for the outstanding work that they've done in this incredibly challenging period of time where we've seen homicides. I've read about heroic acts of law enforcement officers in this city as well during this time. It is unfortunate that we've had to wait this long to have this conversation, but I'm I can't begin to express how much to you I'm appreciative of the work that you do. Clearly, in light of the increased interaction with traffic stops, business checks, personnel checks, the hotline you got coming in, compliance checks, I'm sure you could understand concerns that would come from communities of color, particularly in light of the challenges that we've had previously. I just want to be on record as saying I reject the premise of this being an emergency meeting. I think it should just have been regular scheduled. And I think that moving forward, hopefully we won't have to have these conversations, but I hope that the mayor comes to understand. And I hope, maybe as a result of the conversations that we have in our meeting tomorrow, he comes to understand that the existence of the police department means the existence of the police commission. Thank you.
There haven't been increased contacts. There have been drastically decreased contacts.
Right.
Drastically.
Okay, I will just withdraw that, and I will just say the clarification is pretense, the availability of additional pretense.
Okay, well, thank you for the kudos. And if you are aware of any complaints relative to any of what you just spoke of, I really hope that you would encourage people to file a citizen's complaint.
Yes, and I'm pretty sure we'll probably have an executive session tonight, and we'll get there. And I'm curious to see where we've come.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, any other commissioners have any questions for the chiefs?
I had one question real quick.
Sure, Landon.
I don't know if this is in the purview. It might be personal information, but did the one officer that gets sick get it while he was on the job, or are we sure how he got it?
I don't think anyone can ever be sure. That's the nature of this, is that you can be asymptomatic for 2 to 14 days before, So
Right.
the short answer is we do not know definitively, but we believe that it could have been there's reason to believe that it was a work-related contact. But at the end of the day, I don't think you can prove that one way or another.
All right. I was just wondering. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
I just follow up with Landon question. Did you guys inform the people that might have come in contact with the officer?
So the employee was not working on site, was not working within our building for the 14 days prior to the positive. So while the employee chose to openly share the situation, so everyone was made aware, we weren't in a situation where we had to do any contact tracing or anything like that, because the employee was not at headquarters for 14 days prior to becoming ill.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Actually,
Well,
really quickly, just to follow up. So is there a plan if an officer is diagnosed with a positive test of kind of trying to identify or notify members of the public who may have had contact with that officer over a period of time prior?
There's no current plan for public notification, because currently employees are only encountering citizens from 6 feet away, or 6 feet away and wearing a surgical mask, or if we anticipate up close and personal contact, they wear an N95 respirator mask, face protection, and gloves. So the standard for a contact by the CDC involves being up close, like caregiving close, for 10 to 15 minutes at a time. So the short answer to your question is we don't have a protocol for that, but if there was an unusual situation where a true contact existed, I'm pretty confident that we would err on the side of public safety as opposed to the privacy concerns. So no plan in place. We would certainly be willing to figure that out if it happened.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, Jabu.
I had one question. I've been hearing some concerns nationwide about budget constraints due to this, especially in regards to the police department. Are you guys experiencing are you foreseeing any immediate crunches budget-wise, or are we good to go for the foreseeable future?
It's a very complicated question that I don't think we're going to know. We are prepared for multiple different future scenarios. As far as FY20, which we're closing out right now, we're in good shape. We've cut back on anything that is not absolutely, completely necessary in an attempt to help do our part with considering the city's loss of revenue that the mayor has detailed at many public meetings and that city council meeting. But for FY20, we're in reasonable shape. As the numbers that I just relayed to you indicate, we are down significantly in our sworn workforce, so there is some savings there. FY21 is really unknown. I'm not in a position to answer that fully. I'm not being cagey. It's that we don't know what the deficit's going to be. We're not sure what the city's final plan is for supplanting the lost revenue, whether that's through federal funds received or in COVID relief funds or other plans that the mayor has detailed. So we, the three of us, are prepared at multiple levels for multiple harsh realities, and we are hoping that those scenarios don't come to pass.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question, Jabu. Okay, I'm just looking at everybody to make sure there's no other questions. So I know I want to just, along with Mark and I, all the other commissioners, thank each of you. I know things are kind of a new normal now. In the beginning, it was like the wild west, trying to figure out what's going on, how to best stop the operations to meet all of the changing orders and regulations. So thank you. And we do need an executive session tonight. So if I get a motion to go into executive session, and I will say that once we have a motion, we do need to get off of this call and you all email the link to get into a separate Zoom call that will just be the executive team. Okay.
Can I ask for the reason why we need an executive session?
Yes. We're going to be going over citizen complaints that have happened from February until the present day.
I move that we enter executive session for the purpose of discussing citizen complaints.
I second that motion.
Okay, raise your hand if you're in favor.
Aye.
Okay, great. Thank you. Landon, thank you for joining us. It's good to see you. Hope you're doing well. I know you're taking all your classes online, so good luck with that.